Hey folks, Matt Easton here, scholagladiatoria. So I'm a massive fan of Forged in Fire. Yeah, that's right, I've mentioned it a couple of times before, but I've been binge watching Forged in Fire recently with Lucy, and we both love it. It's a great program actually, and I have to say I came into it quite skeptical because I thought there'd be loads of things in there that would like drive me up the wall and think that there was loads of stuff wrong, but it's brilliant. I think everyone on it is really cool. There are some things in there I disagree with. There are some of the pronunciations and names of things that I don't necessarily, but fundamentally it's a great program. I love it. It's one of my favorite things on TV at the moment. But it raised an interesting topic, and that is something that I've noticed across all the years that I've been interested in swords and knives, and that is, in a nutshell, that when a knife maker who doesn't necessarily know an awful lot about swords, when a knife maker goes to make a sword, one of the most common mistakes they make is they make it too heavy. Fundamentally, the reason for that is because a knife has certain proportions, a certain sort of thickness in proportion to its length and width and things like this. And some knife makers just scale that up to sword size. And the problem is that doesn't work. If you just scale up a knife, you know, I'd just grab the nearest knife that's behind the camera. So this is this sort of South American, it's German made for the South American market, probably Argentina, sort of Bowie knife type thing, 19th century original antique. But if you just scaled this up to be that long, but you made it proportionately in percentage terms, the same thickness and width and everything else, it would be like a brick. It would be handle horribly as a sword. And, you know, it's funny, it's one of the most common problems with, shall we say, budget or affordable replica swords is they're overweight. Another common problem is that a lot of knives don't have very much what we call distal taper. I'm sure that 90% of people viewing my videos will know exactly what distal taper is, but it means that obviously this is taper in this way, but if we look at the blade this way, you should have distal taper on most types of swords. Not all types of swords, but most. That being that the blade will start thick here and gradually get flatter, or sometimes they'll stay more or less the same thickness till some point along the blade, and then they'll get thinner. So there are different types of distal taper, that it's not all linear distal taper. But a lot of knives don't have any distal taper. If we look at certain types of Bowie knife, however you want to say it, many Bowie knives, especially modern made ones, don't have any distal taper. Therefore, if you made a sword like that, it's going to handle horribly because the tip of the blade is going to have too much metal in it. Now, it was interesting, the episode that I've just finished watching with my wife Lucy, who's just there. Hey Lucy.
Hi.
The episode that I've just finished watching with Lucy was about, as they called it, the charay. Now I have to say, when I saw the title of the episode and it said charay, I thought, oh my god, they found a type of sword that I've never heard of. And then when it got to the unveiling, sort of revealing of the sword that they had to go home to their home forges and make, I was like, it's a charah. Okay, that's what they're talking about. So this is a commonly called a Khyber knife, and it's what the Afghans and the various tribes of Afghanistan, including the Afridi and all the others, in the 19th century and indeed into the 20th century, were using as a standard sidearm. I've done previous videos talking about the weapons of Afghanistan, incidentally. So if you want to find out more about the types of swords and dagger and knife that were used in Afghanistan, just search in my videos, just type Afghanistan or Afghan, and you'll find those videos. But the choora or charah, as it's written, so why they called it the charay in the Forged in Fire episode, I couldn't possibly guess, but in all of the sources that I'm aware of from the 19th century, they refer to it as the choora or the charah. It can be spelt in various different ways because obviously that was originally written in Sanskrit and other Pashtun, and other different languages. And obviously when it was written in English, it was written phonetically. So how you spell it is subjective. But generally speaking, in British sources, it's choora or charah. And indeed, it's a large knife. It's a bit like a giant carving knife, isn't it? It's a bit like a kitchen knife, but the most characteristic feature of it is it has a T back. That is a T section. So if you looked at the blade here, essentially it's quite thin and flat here with a T section at the back. Now it's interesting, in the episode of Forged in Fire, they said the reason for that was to give stiffness for the thrust to get through armour. Is that true? Well, if I just put the charah or choora down for a second, I'll grab the short version, which is called a pesh cabs. Now, as I've spoken about in previous videos, the pesh cabs is almost certainly exactly, it does have the T section, exactly the same, and that is almost certainly an anti-armour weapon. So in Afghanistan and northern India, well, up until and including the 19th century, mail was the predominant form of armour, and if you want to stab someone through a mail coat, you need something that has a very stiff blade that's going to burst apart rings. And indeed, in some cases, you're stabbing around the armour, not necessarily through the armour, but you're stabbing into padded layers or layers of clothing or this type of stuff. So a stiff blade for something that's going to get through resistant materials is very important. It's exactly the same theory as the European rondel dagger, of course. So this really is the kind of Asian, or should we say at least that part of the world, Asian version of the rondel dagger. And of course there are similar, in Japan there's a similar type of anti-armour dagger. So absolutely in this case the T section is for penetration, for greater penetration through things which are quite hard to penetrate. But is that the case with the choora or charah? So reminder, this is called the pesh cabs. Pesh cabs is the small one, the dagger sized one. The short sword sized one, it's difficult to say if that was the original purpose of this design. It is notable that despite the fact that these are different sizes and probably for different purposes, you'll notice the construction is very similar. The hilts are made in exactly the same way, with a metal two-part kind of bolster at the top, and then two-part horn. Usually they're sometimes ivory or bone or wood or other materials, but very often horn grips down here, with a sort of metal strip that goes all the way around the pommel and all the way up the back. So they're made in the same way, but the charah, as you see, the choora or charah, is a very different shaped blade, and the reason is that this actually is predominantly a cutting weapon. Now, I've spoken in a previous video about the fact that we can't always assume that a weapon was used a certain way purely from its form or appearance. If we look at experimental archaeology, or people who are writing about, should we say, Bronze Age weapons or Iron Age weapons, it's very common for anthropologists and archaeologists to make assumptions about the way a weapon was used from its form. But if we look at ethnographic and anthropological studies from the 19th century, sometimes from the 18th century, sometimes even from the 20th century, we will very commonly see that weapons aren't always used in the way that their form might suggest that they're used. And I have quoted a source before by a 19th century British Army surgeon who treated lots of people with wounds, both British and Indian soldiers in the military, who had been wounded by these, had been wounded by kyber knives during operations in the northwest frontier with India, and had been hit with these things. And he explicitly says, based on his years of experience in the field, that the people of Afghanistan using these always cut with them and they don't stab with them. And he even goes as far as to make the point, if they stabbed with them, they'd kill more people. And he says it's great, it's really good that they don't stab us with these, because if they stabbed us with these, then we'd have more dead soldiers. But as it happens, they tend to chop with them. They're often used with a buckler or a shield in the other hand, incidentally. And of course, being chopped up, whilst it might incapacitate you and be a fairly horrible experience, and you might lose body parts, at least with 19th century medical science, you're more able to survive those wounds. Large cuts can be sewn up arteries and veins can be sealed off and cauterized and all that kind of stuff. A stab wound into the torso or the neck or something like that, it results in internal bleeding, failure of internal organs, this kind of stuff that 19th century medicine cannot treat. And it is interesting that in the 19th century, therefore, the charah or choora, despite the fact it's pointy and despite the fact it has a T-section blade, it doesn't seem to have been used to stab. Now, going back to the original point, what was interesting in this episode of Forged in Fire is one of the people that made a replica of one of these. I said to Lucy, I said, the way he's moving it around makes it look like that's way too heavy. And lo and behold, when they came to do the testing on the two charahs or choras, or as they called them, charays, it's true, isn't it, Lucy?
Yeah,
it's absolutely true. I was right.
You want me in the video?
So I just want you to verify it's just not me standing alone in a room. There's someone else. There's another human here.
Creepily off camera.
Yeah, spooky. But I was absolutely right. I said to Lucy, didn't I? I said. That looks overweight. I can, you know, I've been training with weapons and training people to use weapons since the late 1990s, since about I've been training since 1997, and I started training other people in 1999, and I started up Scholagladiatoria in 2001. So, Jesus, I'm old. I'm really old. How did that creep up on me? But yeah, I'm really old, but I've been doing this for a long time, and when you see people swinging things around for a long period of time, you learn stuff without necessarily realizing you're learning stuff. And just when I see someone moving something around, I can tell whether it's heavy or not. You know, it's not rocket science. I'm not claiming this is a special kind of divine skill of mine or anything. I'm sure lots of you out there can also do this. But just watching this guy testing his blade in his home forge and chopping some wood, I was like, that looks massively overweight. And indeed, that's exactly what everyone who tested the blade actually in the studio said, is that it's overweight. And I thought I must make a video, and I came straight here, didn't I?
Yes.
I came straight here and started filming this video, having finished that episode, because this is a subject which I have thought about many times, but I don't think I've ever explicitly made a video about it. Knife makers often make swords overweight. Now, this links in with one of our favourite films, Conan the Barbarian. So I've pointed out in the past that the actual sword that Arnie used in the film Conan the Barbarian, which was made, all the swords I believe were made by the knife maker Jody Sampson, and all of those swords are horribly overweight, and I believe that that's probably because Jody Sampson is a knife maker.
It's to show off Arnie's muscles.
Yeah, it's to show off Arnie's muscles, and lots of people go, oh, but he's really strong, so he can use an 8-pound sword. And my answer to that is, yes, I can use an 8-pound sword. There's a video of me swinging around an 8-pound greatsword, but the point is, if you're gonna get 8 pounds of metal and put it into a sword shape, why not have a much longer blade and make it a more effective weapon? Anyway, that's an aside. But the point is that knife makers very often make swords too heavy, and swords have to have their weight distributed in a different way. They have to have thinner blades, and usually, not always, but usually they have to have distal taper. So there we go. I hope even with my rambling drift off and talking about Afghan weapons, which is a subject that I like to talk about, and even with my fanboying over Forged in Fire, and if any of the producers or casting agents are watching this, yes, I will be on Forged in Fire. My contact details will be below this video. I will do anything you want me to do. I love your show. But knife makers very often make swords overweight, and if you need me to be a consultant and help the knife makers, really subtle. If you need me to come onto the show and explain to knife makers how to make better swords, I'm your man. Anyway, cheers folks, I hope that's been interesting. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and feel free to follow us on Facebook.